Right, welcome back to Deano's garage for the XJR 1200 and the valve clearances. Now these are the 25mm shims that I removed yesterday, and I'll just talk you through really kind of how I've done that. So this is the removal tool. So what you do is you turn your crank anti-clockwise, preferably, so the lobes of the cams push right down onto the followers and onto the shim. So obviously they push down on the shim onto the follower. Then what you do is you lock this into position. Now annoyingly, as you can see, Yamaha have only put one hole in each position where the bracket goes, which is a little bit annoying, because what can happen is, I found from lack of experience, that when I lock this into position, and it should be pushing down both followers of the, in this case the inlet followers for the shims, that this one could move slightly and not sort of engage on the follower and hold it down. Because what happens is you turn the lobe so it pushes down onto the shims, and basically you lock this down onto the follower. Then when you then turn this so the lobes come up, in this case this way, because you never want to turn the lobes towards this. If you turn the lobes towards this, so there isn't the space to do so, and you'll cause damage to the cam. So always go clockwise so that it comes back up out the way of this. Then what happens is this is holding down the followers, and then you can, if you can see the little slot, get a screwdriver in, pop up the shim and take the shim out with a pair of sort of long nose pliers or similar to that. So now that I've got all the shims out, and what I have done is, this looks like some kind of bizarre, I don't know, it looks bizarre to you, but it makes sense to me, because basically anything that's marked in orange now I have put back in, because what you can do when you do your calculating, you will find that shims from another place where you didn't have the correct tolerance, you can utilize in another position to make up the correct tolerance needed. So I've marked those. I shan't explain all the detail, but you'll see what I mean when you go to do your own, that you'll measure your shims, find out your tolerance difference that you need, and then you'll be able to use another shim to make up that difference and sort of borrow. So you're not buying, in this case I'm not buying 16 shims, I've only actually bought 5 shims, 3 265s and 2 at 270s. So the orange denotes that I've already replaced the shims and put them back into position, and I'm going to carry on doing that now and finish up replacing where I can. But I'm only replacing where I can in pairs, because obviously with that tool it holds down both followers, so you may as well replace both shims as a pair rather than do one and then do the process again when you have the shim that you've got from the wherever you bought it from, and and redo the whole thing over. So yeah, that's what I'm doing them in pairs. So once I've done that, I'm at the mercy of who I ordered them from yesterday, which was Yam Bits in England. They'll send the 5 that I need, and then I'll continue to put them in. Then obviously recheck, make sure the valves clearances are within tolerance, as I hope and they should be. Then I can proceed to put the seal back on. But in the meantime, so welcome back to Deano's garage for what is the XJR 1200 and the valve clearances. Now I put all the shims in and then rechecked all the valve clearances, and incidentally you have to check them when the bike is completely cold. Now I'll just show you, once this zooms in, on that one that you can see there to the left, you can see that I have in blue 0.16. Now currently it has a shim in there of 270, and for the exhaust, you can see the E in the center for the exhaust, it needs to be between, I think it was 0.15 or 0.16 and 0.21 for the exhaust, the ideal tolerance. So at 0.16 is a bit too tight, so instead of that 270 I'm actually going to drop in a 265 and then we should be obviously at about 0.21. We should be sort of bang on the largest of tolerances, but it's always better to be slightly looser on the tolerance than it is too tight. Down on the bottom here on the inlet I have 0.11 and 0.9. Now it needs to be between 0.11 and 0.15, so the 0.11 is just bang on, but a slightly bit too tight for me. And we've got a shim, as you can see in orange at the bottom there, of 272. So if I drop a 270 in, I'm going to bring that to 0.13, which is sort of bang on where we need to be. And then the 0.9, we currently have a shim of 272 there in orange again on the right, below that 0.12. So if I drop a shim in of 265, then I will be 0.7, so I'll be at about sort of 0.6, so 0.16, so 0.16 whilst being slightly loose is better than obviously being anywhere near 0.9. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to drop those shims in now for that exhaust with the 0.16 as shown on the left in blue, and then drop the shims in for the inlet, the one showing 0.11 and 0.9, and I'll show you me doing those now with the tool, and then obviously we'll test again with the feeler gauge, and hopefully all is good. So the first one I'm going to do is this one. So what I need to do is turn the engine anti-clockwise, push the follower and the shim down, put our tool in there, and it has to be just in the right position, by the way, to push the shim and follower down so you can get the tool into the right place. Being careful to put the bolt in. Obviously you don't want to be cross threading that bolt. If you cross thread that bolt, which is in the top of the engine block, then obviously you're not going to be able to use that bolt ever again, or you're going to have to re-tap a thread, and that can get very difficult, especially in the top of an engine block. You don't really want to be making a mistake of cross threading. So that's the bolt I'm talking about. So because this doesn't have two bolts, ideally it would have two holes, I'm just going to push my thumb in against this whilst tightening up, because as you tighten you're pulling away, so the tendency is for this to sort of pull out a bit too much. So just using my thumb to hold it and retain it, it's nice and tight. So what should happen now is, as I continue to turn anti-clockwise, because you never want to turn towards the tool because you'll damage the cam and you can cause all sorts of trouble. So turning the cam lobe up this way, away from there, what should happen is the follower won't come all the way up because it's been held down, and I now need to get a little screwdriver and pop that out, and then once I pop it out, grab it with a pair of nose pliers and pull that shim out. Right, now you can see just here I've been able to flick that shim up, and now I can come in with these pliers and lift it out. About the same size as a 10p piece. If you're English, you know what that is, a 10p piece. About the same size as a 10p piece, and it has 270 written on this one. The numbers always face downwards, not upwards. Don't know why, but that's what they always say. Numbers face downwards. So as you can see, this is a 2.7 mil, 270, 2.7 mil. And as I showed you on this, in the orange, 270. So that is the shim that's currently in there. It used to have a 2.75 mil, now it's got a 270, and we're at 0.6 for the exhaust. But for the exhaust, I need 0.6 to 0.20, not 0.21, that was my mistake. It's 0.6 to 0.20. So if I leave it as it is, it's tight on the tolerance. If I put a slightly looser one in there, which I'll show you in a second, a 265. It's obviously going to go to 0.21, but it's better to be 0.21 than it is 0.6. Annoyingly, you can only get shims now in 0.05 increments, so it's a bit frustrating, but that's the way it is, unless of course you utilise what you already got, like with the 272s etc. that we've already shown you. So this is a 2.65. Now what you would normally do is put a little bit of grease on here. I've already done that before, but I'll grab that grease and do that again. I'll just grab that. Right, so I've grabbed my grease. This is Molly grease. So I'm just going to, obviously on the numbered side, because that's the side going down, put a little bit on there. And what that does is just helps it to stick down onto the follower. Be careful there's no dust or grit or anything that you sort of transferred off of these gloves. These gloves aren't that clean, but I'm just, making sure there's no little bits of grit or anything stuck to this. So drop that back in, and just with the tip of your screwdriver just make sure it goes in flat and sits down. As you turn the cam, it will sort of catch that and push it flat. But I had one further up here somewhere that kept sort of sliding down, and as I turned this, it then began to sort of jam almost against the shim, and I realised without putting any force on it that actually the shim had sort of slipped out the follower. I guess I hadn't used quite enough grease. So now turning clockwise, because we do not want that cam to be going against the tool, making sure that that is pushed into position and it looks good. Now again, undo the tool, and again turning anti-clockwise. Little pop you heard as I just began to turn that was the shim just popping itself into position on the follower, and you should just be able to do a few rotations anti-clockwise just to make sure that that shim, and all the shims incidentally, have a good look when you do this, are seated down in position, nothing's slid out, popped out, they all look right. And then what I'm going to do is bring this round so it's at top dead centre for cylinder 1. That'll be shown by the T mark that's on there. So we're at top dead centre on cylinder number 1. First I'm going to use this feeler gauge, which is a 0.178. Ideally this is kind of where we need to be, because it is on here for exhaust 0.16 to 0.20, and that's a bit too loose. On the other side it's perfect, got a nice bit of resistance there. That one's probably at about 0.18. This one is too loose, so we step up to our next, which is 0.203, and that is lovely. So that's sort of bang on where it is on the top part of its tolerance. So 0.16 to 0.2, and this one is just a fraction over 0.2, but it's better it to be at that higher tolerance than too tight down near 0.16, which is why obviously I changed it from a 2.7 to a 2.65, bringing it that bit looser up to, like I say, 0.2, 0.21. Now we're going to get on with these two in exactly the same way. So with this side here on the inlets, you can see as I point, the tool is in position. This is the only bolt hole that we have, so that is bolted into place, and the cam lobes are now in position. The followers have been held down, the shims have been held down, the cams are pointing up at about sort of 10 o'clock, around about sort of 45 degrees, so you've then got access to get your screwdriver down into these areas to sort of pluck the shims out. I'm going to do both of these, so both shims are held down into position, so I just should be able to get the screwdriver in and pop both out, and we'll double check what they are and see what they are, and then put the other ones in. So one thing I didn't realise until now, getting this inlet on number one into position, was, I think previously I'd mentioned that it was really difficult at times to be able to get a screwdriver in and pop the actual shim out because you can't see the slot. Well, actually what happens is, without the tool in place, as you rotate anti-clockwise, you'll actually see the follower will rotate every sort of full 360 turn of the engine. So if you can't see the slot, like I can see the slot in this front position here, but on this one it's somewhere near the back, as you rotate the engine, what will happen actually is the follower will move around circular, and you'll then be able to see the slot, so you'll be able to drop the shim back in. So actually at the moment with number one there are no shims in place. I hadn't actually put these shims in place, I'd taken them out because I'd obviously checked, tested, realised I needed to change, and now these are here ready for me just to drop new shims into, so that's what I'm about to do. So again, a little bit of grease, doesn't need too much, just a little bit of grease, and again you can use the pliers or you can just use your fingers and drop that in. Then make sure that that shim is seated into position before you turn the engine, otherwise you'll catch the edge of the follower and sort of push the shim up at an angle and try and tip it out of the follower. And then the other side, we are going to put the 265, so a little bit of grease, just a little, and drop that into position. Again with the screwdriver, just make sure that it's seated. What will happen, as long as it's within the circle of the follower, is as you turn the engine you'll be able to so we rotate always away from the tool, just have a look, make sure that that looks right. That's now in position for me to undo the tool. Another little tip sometimes is the tool doesn't quite catch the follower enough, so it's good to sort of keep the bolt in, keep the tool loose, and then just crank the engine, so you'll see the tool, it will sort of do that, it will move fractionally forward as you rotate the cam lobe forward, which basically means that the sort of the lobe was slightly pushing against the tool, not allowing it to catch and push down on the follower. So just turn away from the tool that way, and then you'll see this just sort of drop forward, then you know you can hold it down, tighten it up again, and that will catch the follower and hold it and retain it down. So when you then come right back up to that sort of 45, 10 o'clock position, the follower won't rise up, but the shim you'll be able to sort of locate and pop out, providing you've got that slot in the right position to be able to do so. So that's it, that's those two shims now in position. So again, rotating anti-clockwise, I'm just going to make sure that those are seated nicely. Give it a few turns. Always better to be doing it like this, just a few revolutions in a few seconds, than at high speed and then hear something go bang and clunk and realise that the shims worked its way loose and wasn't right. So I'm just going to get this now back into that top dead centre position. We know that is top dead centre again, just to remind you, because of the T mark on here and the lobes are pointing outwards. Whenever you're measuring feeler gauge tolerances on your valve clearances, the lobes are always facing outward from each other, pointing towards the back, pointing towards the front. So back to our inlets. We want to be on the inlet at about 0.11 to 0.15. So I'm going to grab my feeler gauges and right, so this is our, they were sticking together with all the oil that was on there. So this is 0.127. This is kind of ideally where we are. That one feels pretty much a little bit of resistance, but it's a little bit loose. That one, there we go. For first I thought that wasn't going in, and I thought, oh no, it's too tight still. That is perfect. That is 0.127, and that's just snicking on there and then sliding in. The oil kind of helps give it that resistance, if you like, because it gives that kind of sticky sort of suction. So yeah, that's 0.127, so that is pretty much perfect, because we are between 0.11 and 0.15, so that's perfect. That one's a little bit looser. It's probably going to be about 0.13, 0.14, but what shouldn't happen, let me just check that, is that our 0.15 should not go in there. So let's just check that. This is 0.152 mil. There we go. Too tight. So if that was loose, we know that it's too loose and that won't go in there. So that's probably about 0.14. So there we go. Absolutely perfect. So that is that. That is the shims all in place, and that's that done. Thanks for watching Deano's Garage.